Standing in my sister Veronica's marble foyer watching my 8-year-old daughter Lily sob into my shoulder, I never imagined this birthday party humiliation would expose the most devastating family secret of my life. The words "discount store kids" still echoed as Veronica's perfectly manicured fingers adjusted her designer dress, that familiar smirk plastered across her face. But what I discovered in the next 72 hours would shatter everything I believed about blood loyalty, family inheritance, and the real reason my sister had always treated us like we were beneath her. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this wild family drama that literally changed everything I thought I knew about my own life, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. If you've ever dealt with toxic family members who think they're better than you, you're going to want to hit that like button and subscribe because this story has more twists than a soap opera. Trust me, you won't see what's coming next. The whole nightmare started 3 weeks earlier when Veronica called about her daughter Madison's 10th birthday party. I should have known something was off by her unusually sweet tone, but I was juggling 2 jobs and single motherhood after my divorce from Jake 2 years prior. Money was tight, but I was proud of how Lily and I had built our little life together in our modest apartment across town from Veronica's mansion. "Oh, Scarlett, you simply must bring Lily to Madison's party," Veronica had purred over the phone. "It's going to be quite the celebration. Madison specifically asked for her cousin to be there." The emphasis on "quite the celebration" should have been my first red flag, but I was genuinely touched that my niece wanted Lily there. I spent weeks planning. Even though money was impossibly tight, I wanted Lily to feel special at this family gathering. I worked extra shifts at the diner and picked up weekend cleaning jobs to afford a beautiful dress for Lily and a generous gift for Madison. The dress cost me 2 weeks of groceries, but seeing Lily twirl in that soft pink fabric made every sacrifice worth it. The morning of the party, Lily was practically vibrating with excitement. She had curled her hair with my old curling iron and practiced her fancy party manners for days. We arrived at Veronica's gated community right on time, Lily clutching Madison's carefully wrapped present and bouncing on her toes. But the moment we approached the front door, everything changed. Through the massive windows, I could see at least 30 children running around an elaborate carnival setup in the backyard. There were actual carnival rides, a petting zoo, professional entertainers, and what looked like enough food to feed a small army. This was not the small family gathering Veronica had described. When Veronica opened the door, her smile immediately faded as her eyes swept over us with obvious disdain. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and her expression shifted to that familiar look of barely concealed irritation I had known since childhood. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with false surprise, "you actually came." Lily, oblivious to the tension, rushed forward with the gift. "Happy birthday to Madison Aunt Veronica. Is she here? Can I give this to her?" Veronica took the present with the enthusiasm of someone handling garbage. "How thoughtful." Her eyes flicked to Lily's dress, and I saw her lips purse. "Although I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, Scarlett." "What kind of misunderstanding?" I asked, though a cold dread was already settling in my stomach. "Well, this party has gotten quite exclusive. Madison's friends are all from her private school and their families are, well, they're accustomed to a certain standard." She gestured vaguely at our outfits. "I just don't think your daughter would fit in with this crowd. You understand?" I felt like I had been slapped. "Veronica, this is a family party. You invited us." "Did I?" She tilted her head with mock confusion. "I remember mentioning it, but I assumed you would understand the implications. These children's parents own businesses, serve on charity boards, belong to country clubs. They're not used to mixing with—" She paused, her eyes traveling over Lily again. "Well, with discount store children." The words hit me like a physical blow. Lily's face crumpled, and I saw her little hands clench the skirt of the dress I had sacrificed so much to buy her. Behind Veronica, I could see Madison and her friends laughing and playing, completely unaware that their cousin was being turned away at the door like an unwanted solicitor. "There's no room for your discount store kids at this party," Veronica said, with that cruel smile I remembered from our childhood. "Perhaps next time you can plan something more appropriate to your circumstances." Lily burst into tears and ran back to my car. I stood there for a moment longer, staring at my sister in complete shock. We had grown up in the same house, been raised by the same parents, shared the same modest middle-class background. Yes, she had married wealthy, but this level of cruelty was something new. "How dare you speak to a child like that?" I managed to say, my voice shaking with rage. "Oh, please, don't be so dramatic, Scarlett. I'm doing you a favor by being honest. Some people need to learn their place in the world." She started to close the door, then paused. "By the way, you might want to invest in some better clothes if you're going to keep showing up at family events. That outfit is rather tragic." The door slammed in my face with a finality that echoed through my chest. I walked back to my car in a daze, trying to process what had just happened. Lily was sobbing in the passenger seat, her beautiful dress now wrinkled from her tears. "Mommy, why doesn't Aunt Veronica like me?" she whispered. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart, you did absolutely nothing wrong," I said, pulling her close. "Aunt Veronica is the one who's wrong, so very, very wrong." But as I drove home, something much deeper than anger began building inside me. This was not just about a birthday party or hurt feelings. This was about a pattern of behavior I had been too naive or too hopeful to see clearly before. Veronica had always made subtle digs about my choices, my apartment, my job, but I had attributed it to typical sibling rivalry. This level of casual cruelty toward a child suggested something much darker. That night, after I tucked Lily into bed and assured her for the 100th time that she was perfect exactly as she was, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and really thought about my sister for the first time in years. How had she become so wealthy so quickly after marrying Richard? Her husband was successful, but not billionaire-level successful. Yet somehow they lived like royalty, throwing around money like it grew on trees. I pulled out my laptop and started doing something I probably should have done years ago. I began researching my brother-in-law's business dealings, my sister's lifestyle, and the source of their seemingly endless wealth. What I found in those first few hours of digging would be just the tip of an iceberg that would ultimately destroy everything Veronica had built on lies and stolen dreams. The first crack in Veronica's perfect facade appeared at 2 a.m. when I stumbled across a business registration document that made absolutely no sense. According to public records, Richard's consulting firm had been awarded a 7-figure government contract 3 years ago for infrastructure advisory services in a field he had no experience in whatsoever. The more I dug, the more obvious it became that something was fundamentally wrong with their entire financial picture. I spent the next week becoming an amateur detective, using every free moment to piece together the puzzle of my sister's wealth. What I discovered was a web of corruption so elaborate and brazen that I initially thought I must be misunderstanding something. Richard's company had somehow secured multiple government contracts despite having virtually no qualified employees, no relevant experience, and what appeared to be fabricated credentials. The breakthrough came when I found an old college friend of mine, Jessica, who worked in the city's procurement department. Over coffee, I carefully asked her about the contract approval process, pretending I was considering starting my own consulting business. What she told me made my blood run cold. "The crazy thing is, we've seen this pattern before," Jessica explained, stirring her latte. "Companies pop up overnight, get massive contracts with minimal oversight, then disappear after a year or two. Usually, someone on the inside is greasing the wheels, if you know what I mean. We've been trying to track down the common thread for months." "What kind of common thread?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Well, there's usually a city council member or department head who keeps pushing these questionable approvals through. Someone with enough influence to bypass the normal vetting process." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Between you and me, we think Councilman Bradley might be involved. His voting patterns on contract approvals are suspicious as hell, but we can't prove anything yet." Councilman Bradley. The name hit me like a lightning bolt. He was Richard's golf buddy, the man who had been featured prominently in photos from Veronica's elaborate dinner parties, the man whose campaign fundraiser they had hosted in their backyard just 6 months ago. That night, I created a detailed timeline of Richard's contracts and Bradley's voting record. The correlation was impossible to ignore. Every single one of Richard's company's approvals had been voted on favorably by Bradley, often against the recommendations of the technical review committees. In exchange, financial records showed that Richard had made substantial consulting payments to a company owned by Bradley's wife. But the real bombshell came when I discovered something that made my hands shake as I held the printed documents. 3 years ago, right around the time Richard's contract started flowing, Veronica had inherited our grandmother's estate after a bitter legal battle with me. I had always assumed I was not included in the will because Grandma Rose had favored Veronica. But now I pulled out the original documents I had been too heartbroken to examine closely at the time. The will had been changed just 2 months before Grandma Rose's death, with a handwritten codicil that left everything to Veronica instead of splitting it between us as the original will had specified. At the time, I had been too grief-stricken and overwhelmed with my pending divorce to contest it, especially since Veronica assured me that Grandma Rose had always intended for her to inherit everything. Now, looking at the timeline, I realized that inheritance had provided the seed money for Richard's entire operation. They had used Grandma Rose's life savings, her house, her investments, everything she had worked for her entire life to fund a corruption scheme that had made them millions, while I struggled to buy my daughter a dress. The handwriting analysis I commissioned from a professional document examiner confirmed what my gut had been telling me. The codicil was a forgery. Veronica had stolen my inheritance and used it to build an empire of fraud. But here was the thing that transformed my heartbreak into something far more dangerous. They had not just stolen money. They had stolen opportunities, resources, and contracts that should have gone to legitimate businesses owned by hardworking people. They had corrupted the system that was supposed to ensure fair competition and proper use of taxpayer money. And they had done it all while treating everyone else, including their own family, like we were beneath them. I thought about Lily's tear-stained face, about the dozens of families whose legitimate businesses had lost out on contracts they deserved, about the taxpayers whose money was being funneled into Veronica and Richard's luxury lifestyle. The anger I felt was pure and clarifying. That was when I made the decision that would change everything. I was not going to just expose them. I was going to systematically dismantle their entire operation and make sure they lost everything they had built on lies and theft. But I was going to do it smart, carefully, and completely legally. First, I needed allies. I called Jessica back and asked for a meeting this time, being completely honest about what I had discovered. When I laid out the evidence I had compiled, her eyes widened with a mixture of anger and excitement. "My God, Scarlett, we've been trying to crack this case for almost a year. You've just handed us everything we need to build a solid case against Bradley and potentially dozens of other corrupt contracts." "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Everything. Every document, every timeline, every connection you've found. But more importantly, we need to do this right. If we move too fast or make any mistakes, they'll lawyer up and destroy evidence. This has to be airtight." Next, I reached out to my cousin David, who was a criminal defense attorney in the next state. When I explained the inheritance fraud, he was immediately interested. "The statute of limitations might be an issue for some of this," he said carefully. "But fraud cases have different rules, especially if they actively concealed the crime. And if we can prove ongoing criminal enterprise, that changes everything." "What do you mean by ongoing criminal enterprise?" I asked. "If they use the stolen inheritance money to fund other crimes like this government contract scheme, then every transaction becomes part of a continuing conspiracy. That resets limitation periods and opens up much more serious federal charges." By the end of that week, I had assembled a team that included Jessica from procurement, David the attorney, and a forensic accountant David recommended who specialized in government fraud cases. We had a plan that would expose not just Veronica and Richard, but the entire network of corruption they were part of. But the most important part of my plan was personal. I was going to make sure that when their house of cards collapsed, Lily and I would be there to watch it happen. And I was going to make sure my daughter understood that no one, not even family, had the right to make her feel small or worthless. The woman who had dismissed us as discount store was about to learn that she had underestimated the wrong person. 3 weeks into my investigation, I got the break I had been hoping for. Richard made a crucial mistake that would ultimately bring down their entire operation. He got greedy and tried to manipulate a contract bidding process in real time right under the noses of multiple witnesses who were now working with us. It happened during a city council meeting that I attended after Jessica tipped me off that a major infrastructure contract was up for vote. Richard's company had submitted a bid that was significantly higher than 3 other qualified firms, but somehow it was being fast-tracked for approval. I sat in the back of the room with a small recording device, watching my brother-in-law work his corruption magic. The meeting started normally enough, with various city business being conducted in the usual bureaucratic fashion. But when they reached the agenda item for the infrastructure contract, the atmosphere changed. Councilman Bradley suddenly became very animated, arguing passionately for the need to award the contract to the most experienced firm, despite the fact that Richard's company had minimal relevant experience. What made this particularly devastating was that one of the competing firms was owned by Maria Santos, a woman I had met through my cleaning jobs. Maria's company had been family-owned for 20 years and had an impeccable track record of completing similar projects on time and under budget. Her bid was also $300,000 lower than Richard's. I watched Maria's face as Bradley dismissed her company's proposal with barely concealed contempt, claiming that they lacked the sophisticated approach needed for such a complex project. The dismissal was so obviously unfair that even other council members seemed uncomfortable, but Bradley pushed the vote through anyway. After the meeting, I approached Maria in the parking lot. She was standing by her truck, staring at the folder containing her rejected proposal with a mixture of anger and defeat that I recognized all too well. "Maria, I'm Scarlett. I clean the Hendersons' office building on weekends," I said carefully. "I couldn't help but notice what happened in there. That was not fair." She looked up at me with tired eyes. "Fair does not exist in this business, mija. Not when you are competing against people with connections." She gestured toward Richard's expensive car as he drove away. "That man's company has gotten 4 major contracts in the past 2 years. My family has been doing this work since before he even knew what concrete was, but somehow we are not sophisticated enough." "What if I told you that I might have information about how those contracts were really awarded?" I asked. Maria's expression sharpened immediately. "What kind of information?" Over coffee the next day, I laid out everything I had discovered about the corruption scheme. Maria listened with growing amazement and anger, occasionally asking sharp questions that proved she understood both the business and legal implications better than I had initially realized. "You know what makes this even worse," Maria said finally. "My daughter Christina just graduated from engineering school. She has been working with me to modernize our company, bring in new technology, better project management systems. We are actually more qualified for these contracts than we have ever been, but none of that matters when the game is rigged." "What if we could unrig the game?" I asked. That was how Maria became the 4th member of our growing alliance. But more importantly, she brought something we had not had before: direct evidence of the harm being caused to legitimate businesses and taxpayers. Maria had meticulously documented every contract bid her company had lost over the past 3 years, including detailed comparisons of qualifications and pricing. The pattern of corruption was even more obvious when viewed from the perspective of the victims. The next phase of our plan required getting closer to Veronica and Richard without arousing suspicion. This was where my family connection became crucial, but also where things got psychologically complex for me. I had to pretend to forgive Veronica for the birthday party incident and rebuild some kind of relationship with her, all while secretly documenting her crimes. I started small, sending a text message apologizing for overreacting at Madison's party and asking if we could have coffee to talk things over. Veronica's response was exactly what I expected: gracious on the surface, but condescending underneath. "Of course, darling, I knew you would come around eventually. Sometimes these little misunderstandings help us grow as people." When we met for coffee, I had to bite my tongue repeatedly as Veronica explained how the birthday party incident had been a learning experience for everyone involved. According to her version of events, she had been trying to protect Lily from feeling out of place among more privileged children, and my reaction had been unnecessarily emotional. "I hope you understand that I was just trying to save everyone from an awkward situation," she said, stirring her latte with the kind of careful precision she applied to everything in her perfectly curated life. Children can be so cruel when they notice differences in social class. "You're absolutely right," I said, forcing my voice to remain level. "I was thinking too emotionally, not practically." This was apparently exactly what Veronica wanted to hear, because she immediately relaxed and began talking more freely about her life. Over the next hour, she casually mentioned details about Richard's business that I filed away for later investigation. More importantly, she invited me to a dinner party they were hosting the following weekend. "It's going to be quite the gathering," she said with obvious pride. "Richard has some very important business associates coming, including some city officials. You could bring Lily if you promise she'll behave appropriately." The dinner party was a goldmine of evidence. I wore a small recording device and positioned myself strategically throughout the evening, capturing conversations between Richard Bradley and several other city officials that made their corruption scheme crystal clear. But the most damaging evidence came from Veronica herself. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had left, Veronica had too much wine and started bragging to another wife about their recent financial success. She casually mentioned how they had inherited some seed money right when Richard's business was getting started, and how sometimes you have to be creative about family inheritances to get what you deserve. When the other woman asked what she meant by creative, Veronica laughed and said, "Let's just say my grandmother's handwriting was not as distinctive as everyone thought it was." I almost dropped my wine glass. She had just confessed to inheritance fraud in front of 3 witnesses, including me. More importantly, she had done it with the casual arrogance of someone who believed she was untouchable. But the evening was not over yet. As I was getting ready to leave, I overheard Richard on the phone in his study, apparently talking to someone about an upcoming contract bid. The door was slightly ajar, and his voice carried clearly into the hallway. No, we cannot let the Santos Company get this one," he was saying. "Bradley owes us, and this is too big to let slide. Make sure the specs are written to favor our capabilities, and if that does not work, we'll find another way to disqualify them." I realized he was talking about Maria's company and their bid for an upcoming highway project worth over $2 million. This was their next target, and they were actively planning to manipulate the process to ensure Maria would lose again. That night, I called an emergency meeting with our team. We now had recorded evidence of active conspiracy witness testimony, forensic evidence of the inheritance fraud, and documentation of ongoing harm to legitimate businesses. David, the attorney, reviewed everything and confirmed what we had all been hoping to hear. "We have enough to destroy them completely," he said, "but timing is going to be crucial. We need to coordinate with law enforcement, the media, and the civil lawsuits all at once to prevent them from destroying evidence or fleeing." Jessica had been working with federal investigators who were building a larger case against government corruption in the city. Maria had been documenting every interaction with city officials for the upcoming highway bid, and I had been carefully rebuilding my relationship with Veronica to maintain access to their inner circle. Everything was falling into place for the final phase of our plan. But I had no idea that Veronica was about to hand us one last piece of evidence that would make their downfall even more spectacular than we had imagined. The woman who had called my daughter a discount store kid was about to learn that her own empire was built on nothing but discount lies and stolen dreams. The final act began on a Tuesday morning when Maria received notification that her company's bid for the highway project had been rejected again, despite being the lowest bidder by $500,000. The rejection letter cited insufficient experience with large-scale municipal projects, which was laughably false given her company's 20-year track record. But this time, instead of accepting defeat, Maria called me immediately. "They did exactly what your brother-in-law said they would do," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "But I have something they don't know about. My daughter Christina has been recording every interaction we've had with city officials for her graduate thesis on government procurement processes. We have Bradley on tape coaching us to withdraw our bid voluntarily to save face." This was the final piece we needed. David coordinated with the federal investigators, and we set our plan in motion. The beauty of our strategy was its simultaneity. Multiple investigations would be launched at exactly the same time, making it impossible for Veronica and Richard to control the narrative or destroy evidence. The first domino fell when federal agents executed search warrants on Richard's business offices, Bradley's City Hall office, and their shared bank accounts. This happened at precisely 9 a.m. on a Thursday morning while Richard was in a meeting with potential new clients. City officials from a neighboring municipality who were apparently interested in replicating his successful business model. I knew the raids were happening because Jessica had given me a heads up, but I was not prepared for the emotional impact of watching it unfold. I drove to Richard's office building and sat in my car across the street, watching federal agents carry out boxes of documents, while Richard stood in the parking lot making frantic phone calls. The man who had always carried himself with such arrogant confidence looked suddenly small and desperate. But the real satisfaction came 20 minutes later when I drove to Veronica's house. She was standing in her marble foyer, still in her silk pajamas, screaming at someone on her phone while agents methodically searched her home office. Through the windows, I could see them photographing her computer screen and bagging evidence from her filing cabinets. When Veronica spotted my car through the window, she hung up her phone and stormed outside. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared from crying, and for the first time in my life, I saw her looking genuinely panicked. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, wrapping her robe tighter around herself as neighbors began gathering to watch the spectacle. "This is all some kind of terrible misunderstanding. Richard's attorney will have this sorted out by noon." "I don't think so," I said calmly, rolling down my window. "This has been building for a long time, Veronica. Years of corruption tend to catch up with people eventually." Something in my tone made her step closer to the car, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What do you know about this? How did you even find out what was happening?" "The same way I found out about Grandma Rose's real will," I said quietly. "The same way I found out about all the contracts you stole from legitimate businesses. The same way I found out about everything you've built on lies and other people's money." The color drained from Veronica's face so quickly that I thought she might faint. She grabbed the car door for support, her knuckles white against the metal. You've been investigating us. For weeks," I confirmed. "Ever since you called my daughter a discount store kid and made her cry. That was your mistake, Veronica. You pushed too far and you underestimated the wrong person." "You vindictive little bitch," she hissed, but there was fear in her voice now, not just anger. "You have no idea what you've done. Richard has connections everywhere. We'll fight this and we'll destroy you in the process." "With what money?" I asked. "Because federal asset forfeiture means everything you own is about to be frozen while they figure out what was bought with stolen funds? Your house, your cars, your jewelry, your bank accounts, all of it." As if summoned by my words, another federal agent appeared at Veronica's front door, holding what looked like official papers. "Mrs. Harrison, we need you to come inside. We have some additional warrants to execute." The agent's tone was professional, but firm, and I saw Veronica's last shred of composure finally crack. She looked back at me with pure hatred, but underneath the anger I could see the dawning realization that her perfect life was collapsing in real time. "This isn't over," she said, but her voice was shaking now. "Family means something, Scarlett. Blood is supposed to mean something." "You should have thought about that before you forged our grandmother's will," I replied. "You should have thought about that before you used her money to fund your crimes. You should have thought about that before you treated your own niece like garbage." I drove away as Veronica was escorted back into her house, leaving her to face the consequences of her choices. But the day was far from over. At exactly noon, as Richard's attorney was probably assuring him that everything would be fine, the local news broke the story with footage from the morning raids. The reporter briefed by our federal contacts laid out the corruption scheme in devastating detail. They had Richard's company records, Bradley's voting patterns, the forged inheritance documents, and recorded conversations from Veronica's dinner party. But most damaging of all, they had Maria on camera explaining how legitimate minority-owned businesses had been systematically excluded from contracts they should have won. The Santos Construction Company alone lost out on over $4 million in contracts over the past 3 years, the reporter explained while showing footage of Maria's family business. Contracts that were instead awarded to companies with political connections but inferior qualifications and higher bids. By evening, the story had been picked up by national news outlets. The corruption scandal was being described as one of the most brazen schemes ever uncovered in the state, with estimates suggesting that taxpayers had been defrauded of over $15 million. Richard and Bradley had been arrested and charged with multiple federal crimes, including conspiracy fraud and money laundering. But for me, the most satisfying moment came when I picked up Lily from school and explained that we would be getting some money back that had been stolen from our family, money that had belonged to her great-grandmother, money that should have helped us instead of funding the lifestyle of people who looked down on us. "Does this mean we're rich now, Mommy?" Lily asked with 8-year-old curiosity. "No, sweetheart," I said, hugging her tight. "But it means that sometimes bad people do get punished for doing bad things, and it means that you should never let anyone make you feel small because of where you come from or what you wear." That night, I sat in our modest apartment with a cup of coffee and watched the news coverage of Veronica and Richard's downfall. The woman who had dismissed my daughter as a discount store kid was now facing decades in federal prison. The empire built on lies and stolen dreams was crumbling exactly as it deserved to. Justice, it turned out, was worth every sleepless night I had spent investigating their crimes. The aftermath came swiftly and brutally for Veronica and Richard. Within 72 hours of the federal raids, their entire world had been systematically dismantled by law enforcement agencies working with ruthless efficiency. But watching their privileged bubble burst was only part of the satisfaction. The real justice came from seeing the direct benefits flowing to their victims. Maria's construction company was immediately awarded the highway contract at their original bid price, along with back payments for 2 previous contracts that investigators determined had been fraudulently awarded to Richard's company. The financial windfall meant Maria could finally expand her business and hire the additional engineers her daughter Christina had been recommending for years. 20 years I have been fighting for fair treatment in this business, Maria told me over lunch, tears streaming down her face as she signed the contract paperwork. 20 years of being told we were not good enough, not sophisticated enough, not connected enough, and now my daughter gets to see that hard work and honesty actually do matter. The inheritance fraud case moved even faster than the government corruption charges. David had filed a civil lawsuit demanding full restitution of Grandma Rose's estate with interest and damages. Veronica's attorney initially tried to claim the statute of limitations had expired, but the ongoing use of stolen funds for criminal enterprise reset all the legal clocks in our favor. More importantly, the forensic accountant had traced every dollar of the inheritance money through Richard's business accounts. Grandma Rose's original $300,000 estate had been leveraged into the seed funding for contracts worth over $15 million. Under federal asset forfeiture laws, we were entitled to a percentage of all profits derived from the stolen principal. "Your grandmother would be proud," David told me as we reviewed the settlement papers. "Not just because you're getting her money back, but because you've exposed a system that was hurting working families throughout the region." But the most emotionally satisfying consequence was watching Veronica's social circle abandon her with the same casual cruelty she had always shown to others. The women who had fawned over her at dinner parties were now giving interviews to reporters claiming they had always suspected something was not right about the Harrison family's sudden wealth. Madison's private school quietly suggested that the family might be more comfortable at a different institution given the negative publicity. The country club where Richard had played golf with Bradley revoked their membership. Their gated communities homeowners association began proceedings to force the sale of their house due to conduct detrimental to community values. Veronica tried to maintain her facade for exactly 1 week after the arrests. She posted carefully crafted social media messages about standing by family during difficult times and fighting false accusations with the truth. But the pretense collapsed when federal prosecutors released a recording of her confession about forging the inheritance documents. The audio clip played on every local news station captured Veronica's wine-slurred voice, bragging about being creative with family inheritances and joking about our grandmother's handwriting. The casual cruelty in her tone, the obvious pride she took in defrauding her own sister, shocked even people who thought they understood the depths of the corruption. After that recording went public, Veronica's social media accounts went silent. According to Jessica, who had connections throughout the city, Veronica had essentially become a hermit in her mansion, refusing to leave the house or take phone calls from former friends who now wanted nothing to do with her. The psychological impact on Richard was even more dramatic. According to courthouse reporters, he had aged visibly during his brief court appearances, his confident swagger replaced by the hunched shoulders of a broken man. His business partner had immediately dissolved their company and was cooperating fully with investigators in exchange for immunity. His golf buddies had stopped returning his calls. His own attorney had publicly stated that the evidence against him was overwhelming and that plea negotiations were focused solely on reducing his prison sentence, not avoiding it entirely. Bradley, the corrupt councilman, had resigned in disgrace and was facing his own federal charges. The investigation had expanded to include several other city officials who had participated in similar schemes, creating a political scandal that would reshape municipal government for years to come. But perhaps the most devastating blow to their pride came from an unexpected source. Madison, their 10-year-old daughter, had been quietly listening to adult conversations about her parents' crimes and had asked her school guidance counselor why everyone was saying mean things about Mommy and Daddy on the news. The school was legally required to report suspected child welfare concerns, and social services had opened an investigation into Madison's living situation. While she was not in any physical danger, the psychological impact of watching her parents' arrest and public humiliation had been significant enough to warrant professional intervention. During one of my secret meetings with our legal team, David mentioned that Madison's court-appointed advocate had requested information about family members who might be able to provide stable support for the child. The irony was not lost on me that Veronica might soon need help from the same discount store family she had treated with such contempt. "What would you want to do if they asked you to take temporary custody?" David asked carefully. "I know this situation is complicated, given everything they've done to you and Lily." I thought about Madison, who had always been sweet to Lily during family gatherings, despite her parents' influence. I thought about how confused and scared she must be watching her perfect world collapse without understanding why. I thought about how Lily would feel about sharing her space and her mother with the cousin whose birthday party had started this entire nightmare. "I would take her," I said finally. "Not for Veronica or Richard, but for Madison. She's innocent in all this, and she's still family." 3 weeks after the raids, that conversation became reality. Veronica and Richard were both denied bail due to flight risk concerns and evidence that they had hidden assets in offshore accounts. Madison needed temporary placement with a family member, and despite everything that had happened, I was the only relative both willing and able to care for her. The day I picked up Madison from her mansion was surreal beyond description. The house that had once seemed so intimidating was now obviously hollow, stripped of its expensive artwork and luxury furnishings by federal asset seizure. Veronica was allowed a supervised visit to say goodbye to her daughter before being returned to federal detention. "Thank you," Veronica whispered to me as Madison hugged her goodbye, tears streaming down both their faces. "I know I don't deserve your kindness, but thank you for taking care of her." It was the first time in our entire lives that my sister had ever thanked me for anything, and the first time she had ever acknowledged that she might not deserve something she was receiving. The woman who had once called my daughter a discount store kid was now entirely dependent on my mercy for her own child's welfare. Justice, I realized, sometimes comes with responsibilities you never expected to carry. 6 months later, as I sat in my new home's kitchen watching Madison and Lily work on homework together, I still sometimes felt like I was living in someone else's life. The inheritance settlement had been enough to buy a proper house with bedrooms for both girls, in a neighborhood with good schools and families who measured worth by character rather than bank account balances. Veronica and Richard had both pleaded guilty to multiple federal charges in exchange for reduced sentences. Richard received 12 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay full restitution to all defrauded taxpayers. Veronica received 8 years for her role in the conspiracy and the inheritance fraud. Bradley got 15 years and was permanently barred from holding any public office. The plea agreements meant no dramatic courtroom trials, no media circus, just quiet accountability that satisfied my need for justice without destroying Madison's chance at a normal childhood. Both girls understood that their parents had made very bad choices and would be away for a long time, but they also understood that they were safe and loved in our new blended family. Maria's construction business had flourished beyond her wildest dreams. With access to fair contract bidding and her daughter Christina's innovative engineering approaches, they had expanded to employ over 50 people and had become one of the region's most respected infrastructure companies. Maria had insisted on paying for Lily's and Madison's college funds as a thank you for my role in exposing the corruption that had held back her family's business for years. Your courage to stand up to powerful people gave my daughter a future she almost never had, Maria told me at Christina's engagement party. Now both your girls will have every opportunity my Christina has because they are growing up understanding that merit matters more than connections. The broader impact of our investigation had transformed municipal government throughout the state. New oversight procedures, mandatory transparency requirements, and independent review boards had been implemented to prevent future corruption. Jessica had been promoted to head the reformed procurement department where she was working to ensure that contracts went to the most qualified bidders, regardless of their political connections. But the most meaningful changes were happening in our daily life. Madison, initially confused and angry about her parents' crimes, had gradually opened up about the pressure she had felt to be perfect, to look down on others, to maintain appearances that never felt natural to her. With counseling and the stability of our home, she was becoming a thoughtful, empathetic child who seemed genuinely relieved to be free from her parents' toxic values. "I like our house better than the old house," Madison told me one evening as we made dinner together. "It feels like people actually live here instead of just visiting their own life." Lily had initially struggled with sharing her mother and her space, but the cousins had bonded over their shared experience of having their worlds turned upside down. They protected each other at school, helped each other with homework, and had developed the kind of close relationship I had always hoped Lily might have with family. "Madison knows lots of big words because of her fancy school," Lily explained to her teacher during a parent conference, "but I know how to make people feel better when they're sad. So we help each other." The financial security from the inheritance settlement and the civil lawsuit meant I could quit both of my exhausting jobs and return to school to finish my nursing degree. At 32, I was finally pursuing the career I had dreamed of before marriage and divorce, and survival had taken priority over ambition. The girls were proud to tell people that their mom was going to be a nurse, that she was smart enough to help sick people get better. Even my relationship with extended family had been transformed by the scandal. Relatives who had always treated me as the unsuccessful sister were now reaching out with genuine respect and apologies for not seeing through Veronica's facade. They had witnessed how strength and integrity had ultimately triumphed over wealth and manipulation. But perhaps the most profound change was in how I thought about family itself. Blood relationships, I had learned, meant nothing without respect, kindness, and genuine care. Maria and her family had become closer to us than most of our biological relatives. Jessica stopped by regularly, not because she had to, but because our friendship had grown beyond our shared mission for justice. David and his family had become like honorary aunts and uncles to both girls. The woman who had once called my daughter a discount store kid was now serving time in federal prison, while that same daughter was thriving in advanced classes, learning 3 languages and planning to study engineering like Christina. The child who had supposedly been too common for a birthday party was now confident enough to stand up to bullies at school and kind enough to comfort her cousin when nightmares about visiting prison made her cry. "Do you think Aunt Veronica will ever understand why what she did was so wrong?" Madison asked me one night after a particularly difficult therapy session. "I hope so, sweetheart," I said honestly. "But what's more important is that you understand why treating people with kindness and respect matters more than how much money they have, or what they wear, or where they live." "I understand," Madison said seriously. "And I understand why you still love me, even though my parents were mean to you and Lily." Real family means you love people because of who they are, not because you have to. As I tucked both girls into their beds that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this peaceful moment. The investigation had started with a desire for revenge against people who had humiliated my child and stolen from my family. But it had evolved into something much more meaningful, a fight for justice that had protected other victims, reformed corrupt systems, and ultimately created a stronger, more loving family than we had ever had before. The discount store kids, as it turned out, had everything we needed to build a life worth living. We had integrity, resilience, love, and each other. We had learned that true wealth comes from treating people with dignity, that real power comes from standing up for what is right, and that the best revenge is living well while helping others do the same. 6 years later, when Veronica is released from federal prison, she will find a world that has moved on without her. Madison will be in high school confident and kind and surrounded by people who love her for who she is becoming. Lily will be preparing for college, proud of her mother, who became a nurse, and her chosen family who showed her what real success looks like. And I will be ready to offer forgiveness if Veronica has truly learned from her mistakes. But I will never again tolerate anyone treating my family as less than deserving of basic human respect. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Has karma ever come full circle in your life in a way that surprised you? I'd love to hear your stories about standing up to people who thought they were untouchable, or times when justice felt like it actually prevailed in your own life. Drop your experiences in the comments below. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well and lifting others up along the way. If this story of family betrayal and ultimate justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about standing up to toxic family members and finding your own path to happiness. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that blood doesn't excuse bad behavior, and that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that you deserve to be treated with respect no matter where you come from or what you wear. Life has a way of balancing the scales when you have the courage to fight for what's right.